Well, good evening, everyone. It's good to see you all again. Welcome to another Talk and Tie event. Joining me tonight to keep me on track, on topic, and generally on pace is my good buddy Ryan Ermit. Some of you probably know him from the Stillwaters Facebook group. Ryan's a good friend of mine. We get to fish a lot together. But tonight we're talking about, thought I'd do something a little different. It's the peak of Coronament season, at least in our neck of the woods, right, Ryan?
Yeah, I just spent a week out there. They're popping like crazy.
Yeah, and today, and I'm no different. I tie an awful lot of resin patterns and synthetics and all those kind of stuff. But years ago, well, I think Ryan and I were joking while you were still snacks in the boat. You said,
Yeah, back in the day when it was all about snacks and naps in the boat, you were tying these old flies and hammering fish for sure. But
yeah, and bugging Dad to take the training wheels off your bike. So
that's right.
So that's what we're going to talk to you about tonight. Is some of these classic chironomids or old school or whatever you want to talk about. They still work well today, and always good to have them in your box. They're a great change-up pattern. Ryan will be coordinating the questions. So if any of you have questions, please put them in the comments section, whether you're watching on my Facebook, Phil Rowley Fly Fishing Facebook page or my YouTube channel. Put them in there. No question is a dumb question. Please ask away. Because sometimes I especially can glance over things that may not seem relevant to me, but obviously may be relevant to you. So please ask away all the questions, and we'll do our best to get to every one of them tonight. So again, the classic chironomid, Ryan, I guess it's a subjective definition. Old school, lots of non-traditional things like that. And you don't see them much in use today, I don't think. There's a lot of great tires out there doing some great work with blended thread bodies and Mirage opal tinsels and all the mylars and synthetics and the resins and all that to make some pretty cool looking chironomid pupa patterns. But the old classics still produce. And when I'm talking old classics, I'm talking early 80s. Like I said, teasing poor Ryan because he was still young then, about those kind of flies. And they still have a place today in your fly box, I believe, because they're a good change-up fly. Sometimes everybody's chucking the same thing. It's not a bad idea to throw something totally different at them, especially to fish that have, in a high-pressured lake, meaning they see a lot of anglers. They've been stung a few times. They're a little more reluctant. They're a little wary of some of those beadhead patterns, some of those kind of things. Throwing a curveball or a changeup, to use a baseball analogy, is very well. Billy Elliott, I see a question there. Hurl. Yes, we'll be talking about Hurl. I love Peacock Hurl. I had a friend once said that'd be a good name for a band. What do you think? Peacock Hurl?
I like it.
Their albums. Okay, so the goal is tonight, we'll get going. I'm going to be alternating cameras. Ryan's going to be, of course, as I mentioned, keep me on track, monitoring the questions. And so I'm going to be alternating back and forth between tying and speaking wide like this. So the first pattern I'm going to tie is called a Bronzie. It's in my first book, Fly Patterns for Still Waters, which I'm pretty sure is out of print right now. So if you've got it, it's a collector's item. And it was a pattern that was sort of the first generation of when the synthetics, I can't even say that word, first coming on into play. And prior to that, we used to tie our flies either all out of strands of yarn or Fentex or poly yarn. Some of you may remember this stuff. And as I showed Ryan this earlier, he said, "You got enough?" And the reason you had enough, this is actually a classic color, this olive. This Fentex yarn only came in certain colors, and the dye lots were always changing, and Fentex was always downsizing the dye lot, and you can't dye this stuff. Molecularly, it won't accept another molecule, apparently, so you can't dye it. If you ever tried to dye it, you just boiled the tar out of it, and it wasn't very good. And we used to take the Fentex yarn and actually break it into across its width like you'd split Antron yarn nowadays and wind that up for the body. And it gave us that shine that we were starting to recognize that chironomid pupa have now with throat pumps. We see it full term, of course, because we're pumping live bugs into those vials and we can really see them. So the Bronzie's the first one will do that. So I'm going to switch over cameras here and let Ryan keep monitoring things. So just let me click some buttons, and can we all see that, Ryan? I can.
Yeah, we can. Even the crowd's making fun of me here, talking about the only thing I was watching was the Flintstones in the 80s.
Yeah, that was probably a rerun when you were watching it.
Scott, you're not wrong, buddy. Hey, Phil, I see you got a hook in the vise there, and
Yeah.
Stuart Forsyth's asking if you prefer a curved nymph or if you're looking at that Scud hook or if you like that 2X. I think we believe that there's a purpose for all of them, but what's your preference?
Yeah, exactly that. I use them all. For many years, I used a lot of Scud hooks. When I started to tie flies, there wasn't a lot of hook options available. And really all you had, Mustad was the primary brand. And I'll just get to start explaining what I'm doing, was the primary brand. And you had to, part of learning how to tie flies was to understand the relationship of a standard shank hook versus a 2 extra long hook in the different sizes. So for instance, this hook here I put in the vise is a standard shank Daiichi 1530 number 12. Nowadays, of course, we've got such great choices in hooks. We can just go buy the particular hook or style we want. But if I didn't have a Daiichi, a size 12 standard, I knew a 14 2XL would be about the same shank length, and I could get the same fly out of it. Got material flying all over the place here as well. So I use a lot of Scud hooks. I like Scud hooks on really tiny flies. The other day I was out fishing 16s because a Scud hook is 1 extra short. It's a very short shank, so you can actually sometimes get away with a larger hook to imitate a smaller bug, if that makes sense. So you may have Chironomids coming off that are a 14 standard hook. A size 12 Scud hook is the same thing. So you get a little heavier hook, a little bigger hook to tie on, and those Scud hooks hold very, very well. And then, of course, the 2XL hooks are out nowadays. Your Daiichi 1760s, the Alec Jacksons, though they're challenging to get these days, are all great hooks too. Usually for my bombers, my bigger, longer chironomids, I'll go to the 2XL hooks. Sometimes, I'll be honest, I just see them on the bench and grab the one I like. So this is the Bronzie. So hopefully, Ryan, I covered that. And this is this fly came about in the early 80s. V-rib started to make its way onto the scene. And we immediately looked at it because it was starting to come. There was a material called Swanum Days that was used a lot in stonefly nymphs and things like that. A little too thick for chironomids, but it started to come in. This is vinyl rib in brown. I'll get it the right way up here for us in midge. And it's translucent. It's got a, sometimes I guess newer materials to call this D-rib nowadays. Flat on one side, round on the other. And we started experimenting with this as an overbody and then taking advantage of the translucent nature of the material to light it up a little bit, if you will. So what I've done is I'm just removing a length of it from the spool here. And I can't show you this because you'll never see it on camera, but it's flat. It's round on the top side here and flat underneath. And the challenge is you want to try and rind this so the round side faces out. Now, the beauty of getting it on a spool is it's spooled with the round side facing out. So when you look at this, when you see the see that curve that's been put in due to the being wound on the spool and taking shape there, that's going to tell you that the convex side here is round and the concave side underneath is flat. So what we're going to do to reduce bulk even more, I got some brown thread, brown UTC 70 here, just covered basically the thorax area of the fly. And now I've determined which is my round side and flat side. I'm going to come in with a pair of flat nose pliers and give it a really good squish, technical term there, to flatten it out. And then I'm just going to secure this flat side down right on the hook. Don't worry about that little tag end. And I'm just going to lift up on the material, pulling on it. There is some stretch to this. And I'm just going to secure this down the hook and slightly into the bend. Maybe go a quarter of the way down, like so, just to give that sort of comma-like posture that chironomid pupa are famous for, that little curvature in the tip of their abdomen. Just moving the light over a bit here so I can see what the heck I'm doing. And we'll just, we can either wrap that down or trim it off. So I will wrap it down. Now, we could simply wind this up and use this to make a cool looking little chironomid. But I'm going to light it up a little bit by introducing a little flash to it. Flashabou, this is copper Flashabou number 6906. I've notched the package. Some of you seen me tie before. I cut a little notch in the package right here. And then that allows me to reach in with my scissor tips and grab a couple of strands out of here.
Hey, Phil, we're talking old school and we're talking Flashabou. How much 6916 you got kicking around?
Enough to last me for a while, and it's not for sale.
$5 a strand, right?
At least it's probably more valuable than saddle hackle at the height of when all that was in a rarity. Maybe explain, Ryan, why, for those that aren't familiar with 6916, why it's such an important color and why it's such a valued color nowadays.
Well, I think Flashabou used to make that. Let's see, they still make a 6916, but it's just not the same as it once was. Back when we started using it, I think we called it blue steel, right? And there's been some manufacturers that they got pretty close, but us Coronament tires, we really value that old school 6916. There's no doubt about it. That color is just, it's probably more impressive to us than the fish.
Yeah.
But, confidence is key when we're out there, right?
Yeah. I was at the pre-pandemic. I was at the Somerset show in New Jersey before it's now in Edison, New Jersey, and there was a booth there that had a package of 6916 covered in dust, and obviously didn't know what he had, and I grabbed it in about two seconds flat. So people talking about your fish from your most recent trip, Ryan?
Yeah, that was a good trip. I'm not sure how the year is going to pan out. I think I'm going to be chasing the dragon for the rest of the year after that trip. But anyways, that's what we get out. That's what we get out there to do. So it was a lot of fun.
Okay, so what I've done is I've taken 2 strands of this copper Flashabou, tied it in right at the bend of the hook, right where I secured that V-rib in, and now I'm just winding it forward, close touching turns. If you get a little gap in there, it's not the end of the world. Just be careful of that hook point because it just cuts through Flashabou like a hot knife through butter. And we're just going to wind this up, right like that, right up to where the thread is hanging. Couple turns over the top, couple turns in front to lock it off, and then just trim it.
Hey, Phil, I know a trick that you use often before you wrap Flashabou is you put a little bit of super glue down on there. And I imagine for time's sakes you didn't, but for the viewer out there, it can be a good way to make that fly a little more durable.
Yeah, I usually do that more like when I'm tying my chromie, where that Flashabou is going to be exposed when on the finished fly. That's what I do then. But in the case of the Bronzie, it's got a cover on you. Seem to have lost Ryan. He's disappeared for a second. So what I'm going to do now is just take this V-rib and just pull on it to reduce bulk and start winding it in close touching turns, one wrap right in front of the other. And you can see it gives it this kind of bronze look to it, hence the pattern's name, as that copper Flashabou bleeds through the translucent nature of the V-rib. And again, we're just going to come up a couple of turns to lock it in. And then I'm actually just going to secure this all the way along just to build up some bulk and a nice level thorax, and then come in, trim that off, and that's the body done. So we're going to we've taken the thread right up to the eye, and we're going to tie in the wing case. And the wing case on this is old school. It's pheasant tail. So I'm just going to grab the pheasant tail here. Oh, Ryan's back.
Dad life.
Okay. I thought maybe you'd had an internet connection issue. So, yeah, Ryan.
Susan from Chinook Wind makes a funny point. She'll trade you a package of 6916 for a 2x4, Phil.
Actually, Sue at Chinook Winds has got a great 6916 substitute in her Glacier Flash. So you might want to check that out. So what I've done is I've just taken a small clump of pheasant tail, 8 or 10 fibers. It's sort of just a gut feel on it. And we're going to tie those in, tips sticking forward, out over the hook eye, just like that. Just get those tied in, go about halfway between the body and the where my thread is hanging, and just trim off those butts. Make sure they're nice and secure. Now you can tie. I'm going to walk through. Going to go old school on the gills. You can tie this with yarn gills or floss gills, whatever you want. But we're going to really go old school. You know what this is, Ryan?
Little peacock action.
Nope. Ostrich.
Ostrich, sorry, yeah.
White ostrich, the original gill material we used to use. And this is actually, you could argue, this may be the best gill material there is as far as how it moves and looks in the water. And unfortunately, it's a little brittle, and it is prone, if you're fishing in algae-type waters, to get kind of stained. So we're just going to trim this. I just trimmed the butt section off. I've exposed the stem and just tied this in place just enough to get it in. It's almost right behind, because the way this is going now is I'm going to form this thorax from the eye to the rear, to the where the body ended. That's where the fly is going to get tied off. So I'm just going to use the by taking the ostrich hurl, and I'm just winding it one wrap behind the previous wrap, and see how I'm using it to advance the thread backwards or move the thread backwards. I've taken about 3 wraps of ostrich hurl. You don't need much. Block that off, and then just trim away the excess. And then for the thorax part, good old peacock curl.
We got a question from David here about super glue, Phil, while you're tying. And I know you like the crazy glue, and I like the Zappa Gap. And I think there's a number of them out there that we use. Some of them do definitely turn cloudy, but I think the key is to only use as much as you need. And as soon as you start using excess, then it seems to go awry. At least that's what I find.
Yeah, I'm right now tonight. I've got on hand some of the Fly Tire Z-Ment. That's good. The Crazy Glue is good. The Loctite or LePages, I think in Canada it's LePages now. You can use Gorilla Glue too. The only thing I don't like Gorilla Glue for is an outer coating, because it does dry cloudy, right? It doesn't dry clear and hard. It dries hard, of course, but it doesn't dry clear, at least in my experience, like the other brands do. So that stuff is great for using as a head cement or gluing something down that you know underneath or something like that. But if you're looking for a nice shine, then you wouldn't want to use that. So I'm just moistening my fingers a bit. The beauty of the ostrich hurl is a little damp fingers. I can just sort of moisten it to keep it out of the way. And just like I did with the ostrich hurl, I'm now taking this peacock hurl and just winding it. I tied it in by the tips where the fibers are the longest and most full. And I'm just winding this directly. The thread, the peacock hurl is always going behind the thread, and this advances that peacock hurl, the thread. So whenever you stop, the thread is right there with you. So that's a technique you can use, a trick you can use if you're not aware of it on any time you're tying a fly like that, and you're worried about where the tie-off's going to be and don't want to build in extra wraps. And now we just tied that off, trimmed away the excess, and now I'm going to come in. We're going to pull this wing case over the top like this, and I'm just going to take my moistened finger here and just kind of part the ostrich hurl, a little bit of the peacock hurl, and pull this over the top like so, and just use a couple of wraps. That's all you need. And then I'm going to take some of that super glue.
We got a question here about super glue, so while you're using it, maybe you'll answer it. Doug Blythe is asking, what do you use to you keep the super glue bottle clean? And I know for me, I like to cut the brush down at a 45-degree angle, so you're not getting as much super glue on the brush. That helps when you go to and then to wipe the excess off. You don't get it all over the bottle. And the key is to only take what you need out of the bottle. The less cleanup you have to do, the best. I don't know, Phil, what do you find to keep your super glue?
There was a great video by I don't know if you follow Tim Flagler. He does those tips for Orvis and things. Tim's a great YouTuber, got a great channel. You should subscribe and watch that. He puts dubbing wax around the threads, a little skim of dubbing wax, and that just keeps the threads clean, because that's usually what I usually end up knocking this over and spilling it. And this is kind of ganky here. And of course, what tends to happen is once that gets on the threads is one day you're going to open the bottle and you got to be the Incredible Hulk to get it open, which I am not. So what I did to finish that is once I put a little bit of super glue on the thread, wound that onto the wraps a little bit, and then did a 2 or 3 turn whip finish, and the Bronzie's done. So this is sort of your classic. What we used to fish these a lot with the V-rib bodies, and you can think of all the different. I've done like holographic green under an Elmo green V-rib, and now you can get the V-rib. You got to get it in the midge, or else it just gets. Again, we want to try and keep these flies nice and skinny like the naturals. But for those of you familiar with Roche Lake in British Columbia, I had a great spring trip there a number of years ago fishing Bronzies, and the trout just loved them. Again, non-traditional. It doesn't have a shiny bead. It doesn't give off a lot of light other than the glow, so it's a little subtle, and it's got that natural look. And we used to call this the traditional Coronament thorax, which consisted of pheasant rump or pheasant tail wing case, ostrich herl or yarn gills, and a peacock thorax. So a lot of the old school patterns had that finishing touch to them, and Fentex or whatever for the body. So that's the Bronzie. And we'll be putting the links when this gets uploaded. I'll be putting the links because these flies are all on my YouTube channel, so you can see how they're tied, and the recipes are all there as well. So,
Pat Johnson asked Phil, "You ever think about putting a UV resin on some of these old patterns?"
Well, a lot of them you'll see you can in certain spots. A lot of them use natural materials, and you would just gunk them all up, right? You would actually want the materials. The one of the failings of these older patterns is they're not as durable as something that's basically coated in epoxy, right? That's pretty well bulletproof. But these have their durability. Of course, you could certainly put a little bit of UV resin on. So I've got some. Bone dry here, and I could certainly put got to watch it, gravity, a little bit right on this wing case to add a little bit of protection and a little bit of, like you could even put a flashback wing case if you wanted on that. But again, a lot of these change up patterns are just being subtle, and I don't know if it shows up there on camera, Ryan, but white ostrich herl actually has good fluorescence to it. And I love that. Yeah, I love that in my Coronament gill material choices. I use certain gill materials. I'll be honest, I don't use the uni stretch that much because it just doesn't fluoresce as much as some of the other materials. And I'm going to show you that tonight. So there you go. That's the Bronzie. Are there any more questions related to anything I've done with this? Nothing?
There's only one more here, Phil.
Okay.
Stuart, would most of these classic patterns be suitable to tie in suspender buzzer configuration? I have tied chromie suspender style. It can be a killer.
Absolutely. And by suspender buzzer configuration, if I understand my definition, is you would actually have either a foam wing case or actually a foam tube coming, like a cylinder coming off. So the foam hangs vertically, and you can fish these flies right in the surface film when the trout are up there sipping on them, and they would work great. I also saw a good question from Darren on YouTube. I'll just take the liberty, Ryan, of bringing this in. Patterns for droppers. These are great because you could certainly put some weight in the thorax area here, but I generally don't. If I was to weight it, I'd use like 10 thou lead, but you got to be really judicious with it because you'll end up making the fly too bulky and unnatural. But these unweighted flies are great for fishing off a dropper because they'll tend to droop away from the leader a little bit. They won't fall straight parallel to the leader like a heavily weighted beadhead pattern might, or a resin-based pattern with a bead would. So they're a great choice for that. And they're also an excellent choice for fishing if you're in an area that you're allowed to fish droppers and fish the washing line technique, where you can suspend these flies using a buoyant fly on the point and these off the droppers as well. That's a great way, like over weed beds and things like that, or you just want to suspend and crawl your flies, a team of flies through at a set depth, because you're balancing your choice of a buoyant fly, which could be a fab, a booby. What buoyant fly am I missing? I know I'm missing one. Anyway, one of those two flies, and then that in combination with the sink rate line you choose, whether it's an intermediate, a type 3, just to hold your flies up above any bottom obstructions and keep them in the zone where their fish are feeding.
So one more question here, Phil, before we move on.
Good.
Lori is asking, could you substitute copper wire for V-rib to give it some weight?
Absolutely. You could make a little kind of bronzy copper john, right? So you can do that. That's one of the beauties of fly tying, is you can do whatever you want to it. You know, if this inspires you to use something like copper wire, that'd be an excellent alternative. And wire-based bodies, you can have some fun with them because you can combine two colors of wire together and get different contrast in that too. So that's the Bronzie. So the next one I'm going to tie is the one I featured on the post I made, the Greenback Pheasant. And Pheasant Tail was always a popular material to use on Chironomids. Good friend Brian Chan's pattern is Chan's Pheasant Tail Pupa, was always a good pattern. This fly does have a bead head on it. It's kind of a further along the evolutionary scale, if you will, from the Bronzie. This is going to be on a size 12 Daiichi 1120 curved scud hook. I've crushed the barb down, and I'm placing the bead onto the vise. Now, normally I would put gills on all my hooks first and then put the beads on and tie the rest, but we're just tying this one at a time if I was tying a bunch. So I put a 3/32 brass bead on, and I use brass beads. About the only time I use tungsten is when I'm tying really, really tiny, like 5/64 beads or even smaller, because by the time you drill a hole through a bead to get the hook on, there's not a lot of material left. So I'm using the density here. I live in an area where we can fish multiple flies, so add a swivel, add another fly. Those are two ways of getting more weight into your system, because I also like to fish not under an indicator all the time. I'll fish long leader presentations. I'll fish with hover lines and clear intermediates, depending on the situation as well. So it's not all an indicator game. So we've got this in the vise now. I talked about gills. So I'm going to show a couple. This is probably the one a lot of people use, and it's a great gill material, is Uni-Stretch. But the one I use most often is Uni-Floss. And the difference between the two is simply how one fluoresces. So if I don't know if this is going to show up, Ryan, but it's okay.
Yeah, looks good.
But when I do this pops. Like, it's bright to me. Like, it really pops. So a lot of times we are fishing our flies, particularly as the season goes on, deeper and deeper in the water, especially over muddy bottoms. Chironomids love that kind of habitat for the larval stage, the bloodworm to live in. And that's deeper, and there's less light down there. So any material that fluoresces any light back, to me, is a bonus. So that's what we're going to do. So we're just going to use some black thread here. So I'm just going to get a little bit of thread onto the hook here. Don't want to build up too much. I do have the bead reversed on here, so the open end, trick I learned from good buddy Trevor Tatarchuk. I believe he's watching tonight, just to better manage the gills. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to tie in because this is a number 12, so I don't quite need this much. I got a lot going on, a lot here. Usually this single strand will go through half a dozen flies. So I'll get 2 wraps on it. I'll place a wrap underneath of it, and then I'll come in front of it, all of it like that, and just use the thread to kind of push it forward, and then I'll whip finish. And this is a stage, if I was tying a half a dozen greenback pheasants, I would do this on 6 hooks. Just put gills on, have a pile of hooks that look just like this.
Okay, so we got a question from Kirk here. Yeah. Do you still paint the gills with fluorescent green paint?
Do you still paint gills on with fluorescent green? No, I would only use white. I've seen sometimes you can paint gills on a bead with the white. Why are you smirking, Ryan? You make me worry. No, I just use the white because the naturals have white gills. So I've just taken that gold bead and pushed it forward. And now I'm going to reattach the tying thread directly behind and kind of build up a little bit of a thread down there to push the bead tight against the gills. And I can trim them now or any other time, but now's as good as any. And my gill proportions are the same no matter the fly, always the same length as a bead. So you can come in and eyeball, excuse me, or you can just take your scissors, take the gill material, pull it over the bead, and make one little cut like that. And now you know your gills are exactly the same, the right proportions. So we're just going to put a base of thread down just to give some traction. And when I'm tying on scud hooks, I usually like to take the thread back down the shank until it comes off at about a 45-degree angle to the point. I don't know if that shows up, Ryan, but that's what I'm trying to say. What I'll do is I'll bring the bobbin right in tight, and you can see how basically it's coming off on a 45. That's when I know I've gone too far. I don't want to go right round the bend on this. And then we're just going to go right up. And then we're going to take some wire, gold wire. Generally, I match my beads to my, wire color to my beads, generally. Don't know why, just do. Just seems organized, a way to do it. So I'm using some extra small gold. On sizes 12 and smaller, I use extra small. On larger number 10s, I would use small size, generally. So I'm just getting this prepared. And we're just going to secure this. I'm going to roll the hook on the side so you can see what I'm doing. I'm just bringing the thread up. And I just grab the tip of it. The light's not great in my office here, so there we go. Got that tied in, and I'm securing it down the near side of the shank, the side facing me, and I'm lifting up on the wire slightly and winding the thread back, and that holds that wire right along the side. Whenever you lift up and hold material with a little bit of tension, it's going to stay righted. It's not going to want to twist or roll around the shank, which can be bloody irritating. So the body on this fly is Pheasant Tail, and this is a tying style, like this back series that I do. This is the greenback. I also tie the red back. I've tied a black back. You just vary the colors of your pheasant tail with the holographic mylar we're going to use for the back on this to your heart's content. So I've got some kind of green olive, light olive. This is olive dyed over bleached pheasant. A lot of times you have to bleach pheasant first if you want to dye it a lighter color because it's a dark base to start with. Right, so you got to lighten it up before it'll take a lighter color. But the neat thing about Pheasant Tail is it's got the different banding on it. So I'm just taking probably 6 to 8 fibers is all you need. You don't want to bulk this up. So I'm just aligning more or less, making sure the tips are somewhat aligned. I got a few short fibers in here, but you don't need much. What you need in Pheasant Tail is the length of the overall length. So you always got to search through the packages and try to look a little bit to make sure you've got, nice long, see how these are nice and long here? Lots to work with, simply so you can grab onto them. So I'm just going to take the tips and square them with my scissors, moisten them, and just tie them in by the very tips. I don't want to tie much in. I just want to get a good purchase on them, right? Because I don't want to tie too much of the tip area in, or I'm just shortening the length of my fibers, which makes it difficult to wind them forward. So now we've got those in place. Now I'm going to take my super glue, because pheasant is brittle, and this is a trick you can do if you're tying any pheasant tail bodied fly, even such as a pheasant tail nymph. Right, so I'm just putting a little coating of pheasant tail on here, a little coating of super glue, and now I can talk for a little bit and let that tack up. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to wind this pheasant tail carefully because it's brittle. You notice I'm going away under the shank and over the top towards me. So basically opposite to the way you'd normally wrap materials. Typically we wrap over the top away and come back underneath, but we're going over the top towards us and underneath away and winding it this way. We're counter winding the pheasant tail right up to where the thread is hanging. And we're just going to hold it there and then pass that thread over right? Because it's wrapped opposite, so it doesn't quite tie off the same. So you kind of just have to do a few crisscross X wraps, if you will, just to make sure you've got it. The beauty of tying this in is when we wind the rib will be going in the opposite direction, and we end up with what I call a crisscross effect, in that the wire is going to better reinforce that pheasant tail. And of course, having the super glue underneath adds a little element of adhesion too. And the other good thing about doing that super glue technique, whenever you're winding something on like this, is if you slip your grip and let go accidentally, there is a good chance that material won't unravel, or maybe unravel a half a turn, right? Because it's already tacked up to the hook itself. So
hey, Phil, we got a question from Darren here about bead color. And I heard you say earlier that you like to match your rib with your bead color, but I think what we also look at when we're choosing bead color would be water clarity, or, color of wing buds that maybe we're seeing from the natural, or those kind of things. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, definitely. Those are all valid reasons. Like white beads are very popular in deeper water with less light, because they'll pop a little bit. In water that's algae stained, because algae can foul up gill material like this. We're also going to sometimes like gold beads just are a flash and attraction. Same with silver beads. Like you said, Ryan, they make copper colored, like copper and browns that are more matching the wing bud area, the wing pad area of an emerging chironomid. Those are all reasons for different changes. Sometimes we just put different colors on, like reds and hot colors like chartreuse, hot pink, hot orange is a favorite color of mine. Rainbow trout in particular like hot orange. So, Ryan, I'm going to get you to entertain them for 2 seconds, because I need to run and grab the green holographic mylar. Hold on.
Perfect. Yeah, well, we're talking about bead colors. There's Phil and I also do some different, other than trout fishing, and we get out in the fall and we love to chase lake whitefish. And if you guys haven't ever experienced that, it's a lot of fun to kind of continue that chironomid season. And we had a really hot day a couple of years ago on a lake close to us, where I tied just a standard black and red PBR, but I put a hot chartreuse bead on it, and we ended up slaying that day. And that pattern's called the, Phil was making fun of me, and he said, "Oh, Ryan," and it turned out to be a hot fly that day. So on Phil's YouTube channel, there is the Orion, and there's another reason to use bright colored beads like that. We don't just trout fish, and the whitefish sure loved that one that day.
Yeah, they did. Yeah, that video's on there. You and I were on the day. I did the vlog on that day chasing lake whitefish. Where if you've got those in your waters nearby, give them a shot, because they love eating chironomids. If you've got somebody new to chironomid fishing, they're a very, very friendly fish. They swim around in large schools. They pull an indicator down pretty good, and they run around and fight similar to a brook trout. They're a salmonid as well, so same basic family as a trout. So they're a lot of fun and pretty underrated fish. And in some waters, they get big, right, Ryan? You had some water.
They get really big in some of the waters. I mean, we're talking 10, 11, 12-pound whitefish in some of the lakes.
That'll beat a 5 weight up pretty good. So for the back on this has a flashback on it. And this is greenback is green holographic. A redback is a redback with maroon pheasant tail. I've done black-bodied pheasant tail with a redback. So what I do is I just lay this on top, flat. Just got that tied in. I've got a little tag sticking up still. I'm going to fold that back a little bit and lock it in. And then I'm going to slide my scissors in and just nip that tag end off. I just want to make sure, because it's slippery, I don't want it to pull out. And now I'm going to take a half turn of my gold wire, so it's hanging straight down. And now I'm just going to come over the top and use the wire to secure and bind down this flash back on it, if you will. And what I'm doing to make sure that, especially in the initial wraps, that my flashback doesn't twist over to the far side of the hook, is I go over the top with a loose but controlled wrap and don't actually apply pressure until I'm straight down. This is the same way. This is how I tie scud backs on scuds, using scud back or any other back materials, to come over the top and then apply the tension on the downstroke. And what happens is the net effect is when you apply tension on straight down, it pulls straight down. It doesn't want to rotate across the material and roll it around. And we're just going to wind that up all the way up. And if I've done it right, which I more or less have here, I have a nice flash back on here. So I've got this, imagine this fly is particularly hanging under an indicator, and all I did is break away the wire, a couple of turns to tie it off, put my thumbnail on the tie-off point. You can see as if this fly rotates through the water, the contrast, which I believe is a good thing to have in flies, of flash when it catches light to dull, to flash to dull, makes it pretty appealing for fish. And then I'm just going to stop this from pulling out. I'm just going to put my scissors and just leave a little tip of a tail sticking out. In this instance, it's just a little added flash on there, but if you have red mylar down the back, that could suggest the red butt of a chironomid pupa. And a lot of times, a lot of species, the residual hemoglobin from the larval stage can accumulate not only in the abdominal segments, which you often imitate with red wire or red holographic mylar, but also at the tip of the abdomen as well. So that's the greenback part. So you can see we've got a sort of a muted body, part of the body, and then a flashy back. So this is going to catch light and just shimmer and flicker at the fish. And then to finish it off, you could certainly build a thread thorax, but we're rocking it old school tonight. So we're going to take another strand of peacock curl. So this has got to be a great fly, right? Because it's got peacock and pheasant, two of the best materials ever Mother Nature ever created for fly tying. Now, when I tie for peacock curl thoraxes, that's the tip area. So I'm going to nip off maybe the 1/2 inch or so because it's very brittle and tends to break when you put tension on it. But you'll notice on the hurl, there's kind of a barren side of the hurl and a side of the hurl that the majority of the fibers are on. So I want to tie this in, if I can, with the majority of the hurl fibers pointing down, because when I go to wind this around behind the bead, it's going to put a 180-degree turn in the material and rotate them so they'll point outward and give that fuzzy look of a thorax. This is sort of Mother Nature's original Flashabou, or crystal flash, if you will. It's got that nice iridescence. And we'll just tie that in. The thread is right up by the bead. And now I'm just going to start winding right tight behind the bead. Really all I'm trying to do is cover up my thread work here. So I've got 4, 5 wraps is probably ample, right in one spot. A couple wraps over the top. A couple wraps in front to lock it and to trim it. Sometimes you can snap it off, but the risk of snapping off pheasant tail, even if you do your peacock curl rather, and usually if I'm going to snap a material off, I would pull down on the bobbin to apply tension and then snap against the grain, if you will, forward, and that'll break it off. Makes a really neat tie off for tips of feathers, things like that. But sometimes the peacock curl can slide out no matter all your best efforts. So one of the things we want to do is still add some reinforcement, is to put a little super glue on the thread and let it carry it into the hurl and down to the base so it glues it down properly. You don't want to try and mat it down and mat those fibers. I've also spun this bobbin clockwise to cord it up, right? And I can actually take one corded wrap right through and back. So I've actually put a wrap through that peacock curl with the adhesive on it, and when I pull down on it, that's going to squeeze out of the thread and maybe do a 4-turn whip finish, snug it up, and the greenback pheasant's done. And again, the combinations and permutations to this are endless. Just change your pheasant tail, change your holographic mylar, and black and reds, red and maroon, green, natural pheasant and copper, tons of different colors. You can change your beads and put some of those bright colors Ryan and I were discussing earlier about hot orange and chartreuse and those kind of things. I see James had a question there. James, a few ponds with endangered round. I'm not familiar with round whitefish. The species we're targeting is called lake whitefish. It differs from your mountain whitefish that are probably most of you familiar with along the Rockies, the Continental Divide, east and west of that. These are a lake-dwelling species of whitefish, although they do get in rivers from time to time. And they have a very almost like a bonefish tail, deep forked tail, really, really powerful little swimmers. So,
Yeah, I was just doing a little Google research on the round
yeah.
whitefish, and it seems like they have more of a brown back from the little bit that I saw, but they look similar. And sorry, James, we're not so sure. They'll probably take an Orion.
Of course.
I can't imagine they wouldn't. Stuart Forsyth says that he tied a bunch and they worked in the Scottish stillwaters. So I mean, they're working all over the world. It sounds like so.
Welcome,
Good
Stuart.
to hear.
Good to have somebody all the way over from Scotland. That's great. That's fantastic.
And I see we got a gentleman here joining us from Brazil even tonight, Phil.
Excellent. Super glue isn't waterproof. Do you ever find thread comes undone? I haven't. Now, usually, I've never had issues with that happening. I have left it. Usually when I finish tying, it has time to cure and dry. But I've had pretty good luck with it, other than obviously fish teeth chewing it. But obviously that's a noble death. So I'm not sure, Lori, what brand of super glue you have. Maybe that's an issue, but I'll keep an eye out for it. I just honestly haven't noticed it. When Ryan gets back in a second, we'll question him as well. Ryan, any issues?
Yeah, no, I find if anything, when I'm using materials where I like to use a little saliva to hold them back, like marabou or like you did earlier with the Hurl, when there's moisture within the materials that I'm using, that's when the super glue can go cloudy.
Yeah.
I do notice that, but when you take oxygen out of the equation, at least with Zap-A-Gap, that's when it really actually secures and bonds. I know people use Zap-A-Gap for different applications, and they'll dip it in water to get it to cure super quickly. So yeah. I've never experienced that myself either. No,
but I'll definitely keep an eye. Oh, and Lori's from down under. Hello, Australia. It's great. I need to get down. I want to go to Tasmania someday. So maybe when all this craziness of the world comes over, we can go chase some browns or do some lock styling in some of the lakes down there. And Stuart, it's in the middle of the night here, but we all agree with that, right, Ryan? Tying down, late night tying sessions.
We're always tying flies before you could have 1,000 flies in the box, and there's always those late night tying sessions. So,
all right, the last fly I'm going to tie, and then we'll make sure we don't miss any questions, is a fly that it's probably one of my top 10 confidence patterns, is the Collaborator. And this is a fly that was born on the shores of White Lake well over 20 years ago. We were running into a hatch of Chironomids there. It's a crystal clear water just west of Kamloops, east of Kamloops. And there is a species of Coronament there, and common to many western still waters, used to be referred to as carrots. They were literally a carrot color, kind of a burnt orange coloration. And they were always fun to try and match. And this summer duck kind of, and I'll explain why it's called summer duck in a second, has always been a popular pattern. I found it on waters all over Western North America in particular. This fly has caught fish for me, obviously in BC, where it was born. Over breakfast, we were all collaborating, and I was behind the vise, taking advice and trying to match what we saw. And it's just taken off from there. I've used it in California, Oregon, Idaho, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba. It's worked really well. And it's a kind of coloration that works, even though the fish really aren't targeting this color of Coronament, they'll still take it. So anyway, I've got that 1120 Daiichi in the vise again. Right there, that's the curved scud hook. I've got the same gold bead on. I'm going to do the same gill technique. So I'm just getting a light layer of thread. So I'm going to do that snap technique. So whenever you snap something, down pressure on the bobbin and snap forward. Keep the down pressure, especially if you're snapping off a tied off material. If you don't put the down pressure on the bobbin, when you snap, when it breaks, it'll make that hook vibrate and jump. And of course, the material just slips out from under. That's all the leash that material needs to slide out. So what I'm going to use for this is another material, Glow Bright, number 16. I get this from Sue at Chinook Winds. And it's a floss. It's almost thread-like. So what I end up doing is I'm taking a 3 or 4 inch length, and I'm just going to fold it, double it once, and then double it twice, make like a little bow tie out of it. And then right at the hook eye, I'm going to tie this little bow tie in, 2 wraps over the top, put a wrap right underneath. That's just to pop those gills up so they don't interfere with the hook. And then again, those couple of wraps directly behind just to encourage or push them to flow forward, and then do your whip finish. So really for this stage, any thread color you grab works because you'll never see it. It's buried underneath the bead. And now we just slide this forward and it gathers them all and we'll trim them. Now, thread color is important on this next part of the fly. And I'll just grab my bobbin here. The original, it was a light color because the material we're using is translucent. And over the years, this has proven to be the best color for the underbody is this UTC 70 or any burnt orange thread. Tan would work, white, but you definitely don't want to go darker because you will influence the overall color of the fly. So we're just going to attach this thread right behind that bead, push it forward against the gills to sweep them forward, and again do that trick. Well, that bead isn't forward, so we'll make sure it stays there, right? Because the risk of trimming if the bead isn't tight is you'll end up with really short gills. So there's the gills all trimmed, and you can see how they fan out. And when I hit them with the light, again, they're going to glow. So when this fly is working in deeper water, 15 feet down to 20 feet or even deeper, those gills are going to catch any available light and say, come eat me. All right. So we're just going to...
Hey, Phil, Doug Blythe is, I'm not so sure if you noticed. I know you do it quick, but the answer is yes. Phil uses his vise to squish the barb on the regular.
On the Regal,
it's just part of his... It's part of his routine. It's what he does, and it works very well.
Yeah. These are the solid steel jaws. So I put this covered the hook shank, and now we're going to use the same gold wire, fine, extra small, because we're tying on a 12. If you remember, I said earlier I tend to use the extra smalls on 12s and 14s and 16s, and use the smalls on larger size. So I'm just going to secure this down the side. Like so. I'm still flattening this out. And I'm going to put a little red butt on this fly. And for the red butt, I am going to use red holographic mylar, size medium. You could certainly use small. You could use holographic Flashabou. I generally like the medium just because it's wider wrapping. I don't use the large because it's too wide a wrap and hard to control. But I'm just going to put a little... I just grabbed it, just enough to get a hold of it. I'm going to come forward. I'm just getting the thread out of the way. It's forward of the hook point because I really don't want my thread hanging at the hook point because bad things will typically happen with the thread breaking. And I'm just going to put probably 1, 2 wraps and come up. And then I'm just going to unwind my thread, because I'm trying to keep things skinny. And then when I'm back to where the mylar is, I'm just going to put a couple of wraps on it, trim off the excess, and then come forward. I'm trying to cover this up and make a nice, smooth, thin thread underbody. So I've spun that bobbin. It's a little off camera, but I have spun the bobbin counterclockwise if I was looking down. And that takes all the twist out and flattens the wraps. And I'm just coming up to make sure any gold wire is not showing through or anything like that. And then I'm going to get right up. Now, the body on this originally, and I'm not even sure if they make this stuff anymore, but it used to be, this was probably the most commonly asked question I ever got. What is frostbite and how do you use it? And Frostbite's kind of the forerunner of buzzer wrap, I would say. This is an olive color, but this was a company that used to make it, Fish Hunter Enterprises. They were based in Washington State, and Fish Hunter has since, I believe, been purchased by Nature Spirit, so they may or may not still be carrying this stuff. It has, of course, been replaced now by buzzer wrap, which is easier to use, comes in longer lengths, but I thought I'd show it, how to use it, if you ever see it, and its versatility, because this is what we used to use to tie chironomids before. Now, it comes off kind of all braided, like a diamond braid or something, and that's too big and bulky to use for chironomids, so we actually used to unravel it. So what we do is I used to trim about an inch and a half of the material, and then grab each end in my finger and thumb, and just start pulling slowly. And it would unravel like this. And if it unraveled completely, you would run out and buy a lottery ticket because it was your lucky day. But what's happened here, and I don't know if the camera will show it, but right where my finger's touching, it's formed a little knot. And the other end is open. But you can see this stuff has lots of memory. It's unruly. It also tended to only unravel to a certain length. So this is about 2, maybe 2¼ inches long. Get that on camera. And so it limited you to use it on smaller flies. Like a number 8 would be just, the way I'm going to use it would just be asking too much of it. There isn't enough material. But trying to tie this stuff in, you can see when I let go of it, it just springs back and wants to go back to its original state. And if you tried to tie it in by tying it by the ends, you'd frustrate the hell out of yourself. One of my principles of fly tying is just get the material on the hook, right? Just get it tied in on the hook, and then we can do all kinds of things in it once it stopped moving around and generally being a pain. So what I'm going to do with this material is in my left hand here, the knot is right where my forefinger is touching. That's the knot. That's holding the 2 strands together at this end. The 2 strands at my right thumb and forefinger are open and will unravel. So if I try to tie them in and grab them, it's challenging. So what I do, and this is a technique you can do with any material that's being difficult, is my bobbin is hanging down. I'm going to I've reached over top of the vise with my left hand, grabbed the knotted end, and I now have the unraveled frostbite between myself and the thread. The thread, I'm pushing on it. Can you see that, Ryan? It's back out of the way. And now all I do is I lift up and I literally pick the thread up, right? Obviously when I'm tying, I do this a lot faster. And then I drop it down. And then I put a second wrap in. I got the material on. And now all I do is I play a little Russian roulette with myself, and I pull because I need as much of this material as I can for forming the body. And I pull, and I pull, and I pull, and this light's lousy, so I'm probably going to pull this out. But we'll see. It's only got 2 thread wraps, and that's, I'm going to just take that. I probably can get a little more out of it, but I don't. Okay, that's it. If there's a strand, I see 1 strand sticking up there, I've got more than enough. Because one of the ways I like to wrap chironomid bodies is down and back. And this provides a couple of benefits. So what I mean by that is I'm going to wind this material down the shank to that red butt and then back up to the bead. And by doing this, it gives me 2 benefits. First of all, when I overwrap a material with itself, it's difficult for it to unravel because it's fighting itself. What's that, Ryan, trying to lift yourself out of a chair when you're sitting on it? You're fighting your own body weight. Very hard to do. For me, it's impossible. And
especially when you're my size.
I didn't say nothing, buddy. Lots of you to love, right?
A couple of beers added to that. It's really hard to get out of a chair sometimes.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because that's something else. It's nothing to do with the weight. And the other reason is, and I'll start doing it, is I'm winding this back. It also gives me a chance on the return trip home to fill in any gaps I may have missed. Now, just like winding any other material, you watch out for that hook point. So I'm just going to wind this down. You can moisten your fingers to help keep this together. Get to that right where that red butt is, and then come back. And when you're making this, you know, not everything unravels as nice as this section did, which I can't believe. Usually when I'm demonstrating, nothing works. If it looks like, ooh, I may not be able to make it back, then you can open up the spacings on the down wrap to make sure you have enough material to get home back to the thread, right? So we're just going over the top like this, all the way back up, right up behind the bead, and we're going to tie it off. And this is very translucent, so that's why the thread color is super important. If I was to tie this with black thread, I wouldn't get this summer duck, and that's what this coloration was called. Was it summer duck or wood duck? One of those two. I think it was summer duck. And that's what the coloration was called, and that's where it comes from. If you get it in the buzzer wrap, whether it's this one or the stuff from Canadian Llama, it's called root beer, right? And I still, even though tying with this root beer, I would still tie a single strand in the same way. Tie it in here, go down, and go back, right? Just to give that nice coloration. You can see how this, it's subtle. It has little color changes throughout. It looks very natural. And now we're just going to take our wire. And what I like to do is put one complete wrap of wire right behind. Take my thumbnail, make sure right behind to sort of isolate that red butt. Take the next wrap right through the middle of the red butt. Then take the next wrap and, if I can, put it right on the seam of the red butt and the that frostbite body, and then just carry on forward. The target is always, I guess, to get 7 wraps, and I know some people get really diligent about this. I just get into a natural, open, even rhythm. If anything, you could probably open up the wraps a little bit towards the thick, you know, as the fly tapers forward, like the naturals do. But if you think fish that can, it always amazes me that if fish can count, thread, body segments, how come they consistently miss that pointy thing hanging underneath? And we're all thankful they do. So to finish this off, I'm just going to, again, use some, you could certainly build up a thread thorax if you wanted to, but I'm just going to use my peacock curl trick again. So again, I'm going to trim off that tip section. I'm going to tie this in with the majority of the fibers pointing down. And I'm going to reel in. If you're having trouble grabbing, it's usually because you got too much material out of your bobbin. Keep it on a nice short leash so you're very accurate, unless he misses it. As accurate as you can be. Get that tied in place. The thread is right up at the bead. Again, I am just four or
Hey,
five.
Phil, while you're doing that,
yeah.
Ray Kolkman is saying, what about tapering the body? And I noticed you did a little bit of taper with your thread wrap, but I know your thin to win is, you know, your motto when it comes to chironomids, right? So maybe you want to talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I do put a taper in. Believe it or not, there is a slight taper. And when I build a taper in, let me just trim this off so you can see a little better. When I put a taper in, I tend to taper on these scud hooks from the hook point forward, right? I might go back and forth a couple of times. How much I taper and varies on the materials I'm using in the fly. If this was a thread-bodied fly, pure thread, I would build a little more taper in it. If I'm using thicker materials, like I still tie scud back bodies or still use stretch floss from time to time, or super sexy floss, or all the different Spanflex, all the different names it's got out there. That's a thicker material. So you got to be a little more cautious with your taper, because the thickness of the materials can, when you wrap them forward, can blow everything out. So so now the issue is, you can see I've got, this is me being picky, and if I had a better marker, I'd do it, but this is obviously burnt orange thread, and if I get too much thread in there, it's going to offset the color and impact the color of the peacock curl. So I'm going to give that a clockwise spin to twist it tight so that reduces its diameter. And I'm just going to take this thin Sharpie here that's really lousy. I should be using a thicker one. It's not working, but imagine that was a big, thick black marker, and then you would just come in. And I forgot my super glue trick. Or, somebody asked about resin. You could certainly do the same trick with your favorite thin viscosity resin. So I've just put a little bit of resin on there. The beauty of the resins is they don't dry until you cure them. So we just get that in, and I'm kind of sliding the thread onto the bead and letting it slide down into the base of the hurl so it'll bind it. I'm not trying to wind on top of the hurl with the resin here. And I put my whip finisher down somewhere. Oh, there it is. And again, just spin that clockwise.
What a coincidence, Phil. We're talking about tapers, and the taper king himself, Mr. John Kent, has joined us.
I see that. John's right.
And,
there are some colors in Frostbite you just can't find anywhere else. So if you can find it, get it. I still use red for there's a pattern out of my first book. I was actually contemplating tying it tonight, was the Frostbite Bloodworm. That's just Frostbite, wire, and 2 strands of super stretch floss out the back. Really, really super simple. Great clear water fly. And the other thing, of course, we want to do to this fly, because it's brittle. And I'm just going to give it a coating of, you could use super glue, you could use Sally Hansen's Hard as Nails, or you could use your favorite resin.
I don't know how many occasions I've been out, Phil, where you and I are fishing, and we're catching by matching the hatch, and then I think you have a special place in your heart for this fly, because I've seen you pull it out on multiple occasions just to see if it'll catch fish that when it doesn't match the hatch. And whether it's been some of the local waters around Edmonton or here, or even a couple of the trips we've made to Moline Lake where, the PBR, the Refucia's killing it, and you take the Collaborator out, which looks nothing like what's hatching. And this fly works constantly. I know that you have a lot of confidence in it, but this is one of those patterns you can fish no matter what seems to be hatching, in my experience with you with it anyways.
Yeah, it's one I have ultimate confidence in. It's one I would consider a searching pattern. Just turn the fly tying light off, not to blow everything out. It's just one I have total confidence in all the time. It's, if I know they're eating chironomids, but I can't figure it out, chances are I'll put this one on. I've used it down, like I said, California, on lakes like Crowley, Lake Davis, where they get a species of chironomid they call down there the blood midge. This does a pretty good job approximating the pupa, because you get that nice bleed through on the butt section too. It's just been a fly I would never leave home. Somebody asked me, a chromie and all its variations, and by variations I mean rib colors. I was using a chromie with a black rib the other day, red ribs. Since the advent of holographic and all the different colored wires, the combinations and rib colors on chromies and what I call gunmetal chromies, GMCs, and that's using the 6916 or anything, an anti-static bag, that sort of pewter gray color that imitates a chironomid pupa that's not quite totally gassed up like a chromie is. You're not familiar with this? Hey there, there's Jack. Photobomb. They use those, they generate those gases to help provide buoyancy and elevate their way to the surface. And it really gives a reflective shine. And that's why today's, the great patterns we have today that really mimic that reflective nature of the natural pupa works so well. I saw John here. I got to put this comment up. What the heck is thin to win? John and I, for those of you who don't know, if you've never seen us, we're always bantering back and forth. I always criticize him. His flies are too thick, and he always says mine are too thin. But I have great respect for John and the flies he's tied. I use a lot of his stuff. In fact, John, you'll be happy today. I was tying some rusty nails. So a great pattern. John uses really innovative use of Mirage Opal Mylar, a great material to blend into your chironomid patterns today. So, all right. What was the other question we've got here? Brian, I'm glad I still have all those.
Go ahead. Sorry,
I just still have those colors. Nice trick with the unwinding. Yeah, that's the best way. If you try just to tie it in, just in its still raveled up state, it just the chironomid is thick and bulky and ugly, so just learning to unravel it. But again, the buzzer wraps today have made life a lot easier for you. But there used to be Hairline had a product called Flashabou, which was buzzer wrap basically. A lot of these manufacturers, it's all the same stuff. They just put their own different trade name on it. So look around. Yeah.
There's another question here. I missed it myself, but do you have an elastic holding your mylar on your spool or something?
Oh yeah, that's that little
Special
trick.
little elastic.
Yeah, let me switch cameras. And I think I saw this. I did a presentation on the island, and but this is just a little. You can make these yourself. This is a little. If you go to Fly Fish Foods channel, Curtis and Cheech, back in their early days when they were first doing YouTube, they put a little tutorial how to make this. Hopefully it's still up there, guys. But it's just a bead, and it's super glued or crazy glued, super glued to elastic. And if you're diligent like I'm not here, but the idea being whatever material you are using, I'm just moistening this so it'll go through. It's like threading a bobbin. I just tip this on its side like so. I'm trying to show this on camera. And thread it through this is fighting me. Wire is definitely easier than floss, but pass it through the big opening of that bead. I'll get it if I'll die trying. And push that through.
See, this is where payback comes in. And remember at the beginning of this episode, he was talking about how young I was. This is what happens when you get old like him.
You get feeble, uncoordinated. The material has nothing to do with it. Anyway, I'm almost through here. There we go. So it's fed through through that bead, and then just to wind it, it's kind of like a tippet keeper on a spool of tippet. Same basic principle, right? And these will fit, and you just make a bunch of them and fit them up, and it just keeps stuff that likes to unravel. Like maybe I should have done it with this, but usually on these UTC wires, you just make use of the little end cap, or a lot of spools nowadays have the notches like this in them as well, that you can just come in when you're finished with the material, just wind it up close, and then put a half turn in there and pinch it in there. I usually a little tag sticking out, so it's easy to find. But that's that little spool tender, I guess we can call it. All right. So no more questions?
Only one last question here about the UTC or any kind of fraying off the spool. And depending, I think, like anything else, whether it was put on the spool on a Monday or a Friday, I think kind of seems to make a difference. And important to make sure that...
Yeah, I have had some more recently. I've got some spools of red that look like a bait caster I would use, because I don't use them very much, and they overwound and spun, and then they fray up and bind in, and it's it's frustrating, and I've tossed a few spools out as a result of it. And but fortunately we got lots of other. I use a variety of different thread types: UTC, Semperfi, Textream. A lot of times it's color based or whatever, your needs at the time, and it's there, right? So there's so many it's a good thing about the competitive world we're in. There's some good stuff out there that we can all take advantage of. That's good to hear. That's where the Collaborator was born, John. It was on White Lake, so it's good to know it still works there. And Ray, what is your go-to chironomid pattern? Where did that go? It's not showing up. Oh, there it is. Pushing the button too fast. Collaborators up there. Probably some of my flies. PBRs. Basic black and red. Black Sally. Chromies. Gunmetal chromies, which is basically a chromie tied with that 6916 or that some of that Glacier Flash from Chinook Winds I mentioned. And I'll put the links to Chinook Winds and Kent from Canadian Llama down at Go, so you can have a look at the products there as well online after. Some of John Kent's stuff I love his Bleeding Elvis, and the Refugia is making, there's things that come and they go, but the Refugia is getting a little bit more. That's a great tip, Sue.
And that's just a takeoff of really of John's Guns and Roses. I mean, that Guns and Roses pattern is number one in a number of my friends' boxes as well.
Yeah, I think any pattern that has that silver and red or gunmetal red when the hatch is on and those pupa are starting to inflate with those gases and get shined up, any of those patterns that have that attribute to them are going to work for you. Generally, I use the darker, somber colors earlier in the emergence when the pupa are still staging near the bottom and they haven't inflated, and they can take days to get all gassed up. It's not something that happens in 5-10 minutes. You know, in some species, I'm sure it does, because I think Rick Hafley told me when I was doing the research for my new book there's over 2,500 species in Western North America alone. There's more chironomid species than all the other aquatic insect species combined. So, yeah. So, okay.
It's a good time.
Yeah. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this. Let me know if there's other talk and tie topics you'd like us to delve into. Happy to show flies out of my fly box. And of course, we still got, generally I do these once a month along with my lake talk events where we bring in guests to talk about specific lake tactics. The most recent one was Todd Oshie. We talked about lock style. Todd's a competition angler in Canada and fishes lock style almost exclusively. So we had a good discussion about that. And that whole presentation was based on the feedback I received. Can you talk about lock style, please? Fishing from a drifting boat, which is a great way. So, yeah, this is hopefully you enjoyed it. Again, if you missed this or came in halfway through or you want to watch it again, it's going to be recorded. It'll be available on my Phil Rowley Fly Fishing Facebook page and on my YouTube channel, so you can watch it. See the freezy come in there. So you can watch it whenever you want. And please don't hesitate. If questions pop up after, just pop them in the comment section and I'll get to them as fast as I can. So thanks a lot, everyone, for watching. And special thanks to Ryan for keeping me on track and bringing those questions in. And it's always good to see you, buddy. When we going fishing again?
Soon, buddy, soon. If if there's any, we put a hurting on him last week, so maybe we need to give him a break.
Okay, well, not too long, because before long, summer will be here. It'll be June soon. So anyway, take care, everyone. Stay safe, and we'll see you on the next broadcast.
Thanks, everybody.